So for the fictional project that we're going to build in order to demonstrate how to use Adobe XD, it's going to be just an idea that I came up with real quickly. It's not very original. It's going to be for a task app of some sort, like for completing tasks. You know, everybody and their mother does this. And we're going to call it Remember That. I don't have a logo. We're just going to have a simple word-based logo. And when you're designing for a website or an app, usually for the first thing that I consider, I start at the top. You know, what is going to be at the very top? And usually that's going to be the logo. That's going to be a navigation of some sort. In that bar up there, as a whole, it's called the nav bar usually. It can go by other different names as well. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take our nav bar and we're going to create a rectangle by just left clicking and dragging all the way out from the very left to the very right. And you'll notice when you get to certain areas, when you're moving your mouse, the mouse, it will sort of like snap to those areas, which helps you really make sure that when you draw out something like this, where you want it to go from the very left to the very right, it'll stay there and it'll make it easy for you. So you're going to see guides as well, which are these purple indicators at times, which make life a lot easier. So if we switch back to the select tool and we select on this, we can see that there is a stroke. Now, by default, currently, when it comes to Adobe XD and every update they've had, they always add a border. And so for this purpose, I don't want a border. We're going to take it off. And I'm going to choose, though, to have a colored background for the nav bar, which will contain the logo in the navigation. You don't always have to do that. In terms of UI design, you don't have to have a background. And I will toggle it on and off just to show you. And for a large part, it's pretty much a subjective preference. It's not objectively true that you always have to have a nav bar background like this. I'm just choosing to do it. All right, so let's go ahead, and another thing I want to show before we start actually putting the logo on, select the artboard by choosing the name. By the way, you can change the name by double clicking. We can call this our home page because this is going to be a home page we're designing. If you come over here and under the properties panel and choose this right here, and you check on grid, you'll see we have like this overlay right here of these 12 different columns. You can control how many columns you want, but what is its purpose? Well, when it comes to designing layouts for the web, usually there's a grid system that's used that the front-end developer uses in order to implement your design. And it makes life a lot easier, especially for the developer when they're trying to translate your design into workable code through HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so we can toggle this on and off to make sure that we're creating a good, well-defined structure and a container for the elements that we place on the artboard. All right, so for me, I want to make sure that our logo starts just on this very first column. So I'm just going to left click there with the type tool just once, and then we're going to put Remember That. And it's okay if these, if your elements extend beyond these columns. It's not a big deal. I think I will be doing a front-end development tutorial where we take this design and actually make it work as well. So look out for that tutorial if it's not already ready based on when you're watching this. So now we're going to go ahead and toggle off that grid layout. And here's our logo. It's not very good, is it, right? Well, it's not going to be because we didn't work on it. I like this font lately. I've been using called Poppins. And I'm going to change it to bold. All right, so if you don't have the Poppins font, you probably don't, then you want to come over here to Google and we're going to type in Poppins. 1 second, I'm on the other monitor. Let me drag it over. So if you type in Poppins in Google, you'll find this right here. It's fonts.google.com. You can download this font family and install it. If you do that, you'll open it up in your zip editor. You just take all these files, just push them onto a folder in your desktop, and then you double click on them and then you can install them. It's very easy. Hopefully you know how to install fonts, but if not, you can always use Google. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and take the color. This is where you change your color for the text. So remember when I said when you select different things, the panel over here is gonna show different elements. So we have a white rectangle, and these are all the things that we can do with it. And then we have our text. Okay, well here we have text specific properties such as changing the typeface of the font, changing the weight, making it thin or bold or whatever, changing the size. We can just left click and drag up to change that or enter it numerically on the keyboard. So we could do all this stuff here. Alignment, justification, we can make them title case. If you ever want to undo, Control Z, of course. We can change the opacity here, which opacity is pretty much present on anything you select. Blend modes, we'll get into that in a little bit. But of course, we can change the fill, give it a border if we want, a shadow, and all that good stuff. So for us, I'm going to change it just to black right here, and then I'm going to Alt and scroll in, or the scroll wheel to zoom up, and I'm going to take and double click into here, and I'm going to choose that, and then we're going to give it a primary color. So when it comes to UI design and your color scheme, you want to have a predefined set of colors that you use throughout the design. Some people only have 2 colors, some have 3, some have more. It all depends on your brand identity. So for us, we're going to use a primary color though, and we're going to be around blue. It's going to be like a bluish color, and we can just drag this around until we find a blue that we like. We can also drag this around where it controls the saturation, like a really vibrant color right here. And then we can desaturate it or this way. And then we could also choose to make it very light or very dark. All right, so it all depends on what color you want to use. I'm just going to use this color right here. The color code, if you want to follow along exactly, is 007AF3. You just enter it right here, hit enter, and it'll select it. I'm also going to hit plus here to save it as a color swatch, which means I don't have to use the eyedropper tool in the future if I want to change another element to that color. I just click right here. All right, next up, now that we have our logo, that's all I'm going to say our logo is. It's a perfectly acceptable logo. It's very simple. But of course, this isn't a logo design tutorial. I don't want to spend time on that. Next up is going to be the navigation. There's a lot of ways to approach a navigation when it comes to a web design. Right here, one of the things, I'm not going to get too much into the theory of UI design because this is really an Adobe XD tutorial, but I am going to talk about this a little bit. When it comes to your navigations, one thing that you need to consider, do you have enough room to fit all of the links that you want that will redirect to your various pages? Because we're starting off on a desktop, we have all this room to put our links, right? Well, of course we do. I do see sometimes people use those little hamburger menu, the 3 little lines on desktop when they only have like 3 or 4 links. That does not make sense. Don't do that. We have all this space, so we're going to use it, and we're going to put a horizontal navigation here. So I'm going to choose to have 3 links right here. One's going to say home. And you should generally always have a home button. People expect it. It's a user experience thing. It's a usability thing. People want to be able to find a quick way to get back to your home. Usually I'll take the logo, I'll link that, and make sure if they click that, that'll go back to the home page. And then also have another home link as well on top of that. And so there's been usability studies on this. It's recommended that you should do it. Now, again, we're going to talk a little bit about UI design fundamentals here. I'm going to duplicate this by hitting Control D and then holding Shift and then left clicking and dragging out. When I hold Shift, it'll keep it on the same exact horizontal path. If I let go, it'll move it around. We don't want that. And so I'm going to hold Shift, left click, drag out, and then this will be the next link. Right now, you don't have to follow this part because we're going to restructure it, but I wanted to demonstrate something really quickly. So if you want to watch at this point, just go ahead. I'm going to change this one to features. We're going to hold Shift just the same way, and notice these guides. Now I know we have equal space between the links because it's telling us there's 72 pixels or so. And that's important for alignment and consistency in your layout, which is a UI design fundamental. Now, looking at this, I'm going to zoom up a little bit here. Everything looks pretty decent, but when it comes to UI design and we're talking about separating out your different elements visually, there's not much separation occurring here, visually speaking, from these 3 pieces of type and this, right? Yeah, these are basically spaced out a little bit, but they're all the same exact font size, they're the same weight, they're bold, and they're the same color pretty much. So we want to fix that. So there's multiple ways to do that, and it's going to look a lot better. In fact, again, you don't have to follow along. You can just watch. I'm going to duplicate all those, and we're going to see how much better the one I'm going to create looks when we establish what's called a proper visual hierarchy, which is another UI design fundamental. So what we're going to do is we're going to make these a little bit smaller, and by that I mean probably, well, first let's change the weight. One great way to separate and establish a visual hierarchy is by changing the weight of your type. So now, look at that. Your eye's kind of more drawn over here because it's big and bold, right? But at least these look different now. And that's we want it to look different because these are different things. This is a logo, and then this is a navigation. We can leave it just like this, and I think it would be perfectly fine. You could also make them a little bit smaller in font size if you wished as well. Now, here's one thing. This is the reason I was telling you don't follow along, because I wanted to describe something that's going to save you a lot of time going forward. Let's say, for instance, you decide that you want to change this middle link to a different word, right? Maybe it has a different amount of characters. Let's say it's a FAQ page, like a frequently asked questions page. FAQ. What's the problem now? Well, the problem is we have all this space here between, and we have all this white space, as it's called. Sometimes it's called negative space, just the empty space between elements in your user interface. And then we have this amount right here. So if I were to draw out a little square between these two, we'll make this red, and put it here. Look, it's inconsistent. It doesn't look good. You want consistency. And so what you would have to do is just drag this back over. All right, it's not a lot of work, but it can be a lot of work if you're dealing with a different scenario where you have a lot of elements that need to be aligned properly, right? So we can fix this and make it so that they will automatically align themselves by using a feature in Adobe XD that will help us greatly. All right, so with our home button, what I want to do is I want to take a container that will wrap around it. All right, so we'll go back to our select tool. We're going to hide the border. We're going to go to our layers now. So we haven't talked about the layers yet. The layers, basically every shape that you, or every element that you put onto this canvas will show up here, all right? And they're all stacked in a certain order. So for instance, this rectangle 2 is this nav bar background. By the way, it's a good idea to get in the habit of changing the name of your layer. So you double click into it. This could be like nav background. All right. So if we move it up by left clicking, dragging, notice it's on top. All right. So this is how layers work in most applications, starting with the old school Adobe Photoshop way back in the day. So what we want to do, we can't see our home button because any element that the last element you added is naturally going to be placed on top of it. So we're just going to push it right there underneath it. All right, so we can't see it because it's the white color, right? So we can change it just so we can see what it's looking like by changing the color here, like that. And what we want to do, and we are going to make a cool little interaction where when you hover the mouse over it, it will change to like a gray color like it is. What we want to do now is just take that and remove that. We're going to select both of those layers. And to do that, we're going to select just this home and then hold shift and then left click and select that. Now you can see these two layers are highlighted. You can also select them the same way up here in the layers panel. And what we want to do now is right click, and we're going to choose make component, or the shortcut is Control K. We're going to click that, and notice now it turns into this green outline. We select other things, it has this typical blue outline, or hover over, we see blue outline. This is now green because it is a component. So a component allows us to do something really cool. You can see right here that it has a padding option. So enable, disable padding. We want to click on that. Now when we click on it, it's going to add padding from the top, left, or right rather, bottom, and left. And then these values are pixel values, and if we adjust these, you'll see how it starts adjusting situations right here. Now you want these pretty much to be even for the most part. So this is top, this is bottom. Let's just change, let's change this one to 30. And then your values may be slightly different. This is 46, so let's just change that to, let's change this one to 46 as well. So now they're pretty much even, top, left, bottom, right. Now what we can do is we can duplicate this with Control D, move it over. And remember, use your guides. You can see right there is where the edges meet because of that turquoise little line showed up vertically between them. And so now what we can do is I can double click into this and I can change this to features. And guess what? The space around it automatically expands, which is very helpful. So now, if I duplicate this, we can put it here, and we can name this one pricing, and there we go. All right. So I wanted to show another thing here that you can do with as far as creating little interesting micro interactions, as they're called. For instance, if we hover over one of these, we can make the background change, or we can make the font bold, or change the color of the font. You could do a lot of different things. So right up here, if we select on our home right here, you'll see it says the default state. Well, if we click on plus, we can add a hover state and then just hit enter. So now we have two different states, a default state and a hover state. Nothing changes when we select between these. So let's say, for instance, for the hover state, all we have to do is, if we want the background to change, we double click into it. So notice it's selected our rectangle 3, and we'll change the background color. Something very light gray. F1, F1, F1 is the color code. We'll hit enter. Now if we select it and we go back, we could see it maintained that change only for the hover state because that's the state that we had selected. And so now, if we go back to default state, and we're gonna hit this play icon, we haven't checked this out yet, but it basically allows you to preview your design, and it has any type of interactivity ready to go. So if we hover over, look at that. Isn't that cool? All right, so it doesn't do it for the, or actually it does do it for the other ones because we changed the main component instance. But notice how it's doing this weird thing where it's changing it to home. So let me show you real quickly. When you have a component, you'll see this little green filled in area. If we select what are called like the instances of that component, it's not filled in green. See this right here? It's kind of just, there's a little dot of green in the middle. This one has a filled in green. So this is kind of an important thing to demonstrate. And we're gonna get back to fixing that issue with the home. Actually, we'll do it right now. On features, this instance of features, if we click on hovers, we could see it says home still, right? So we could change this back though by changing this to features. Let's go ahead and choose default state, and then also hover. This is going to change to pricing, and so now both of these say default. All right, now those are going to behave exactly as we want them to. So one important thing to understand, if you make a change on your main component, the component that you created first, it's going to make that change for your other, the instances of the component. That's one of the benefits of it. So let's say, for instance, we wanted this background to be like this blue color. We come in here, take that background, rectangle 3, and we'll make it blue. And guess what? All the other instances change to blue as well. And the utility of this may not be immediately evident, but when you're dealing with a design that has a lot of different, many different artboards and canvases that reusing the same elements, it makes your life so much easier when you could just change it in one area rather than having to change that area, that process or whatever you changed in many different areas of the design. So going back, one other thing I want to change though, one thing that makes sense for the purpose of usability, it's nice to have an indicator on which page the person's currently on. So we're designing a home page, so it makes sense to emphasize home, right? Of course it does. So what we can do is, for default state, on this instance, we can double click here so we could select our home text as a part of that main component, and we'll choose bold. Now that's going to change all the other ones, but guess what? We can override them. So when we change properties in an instance of a component, it won't translate to any of the other ones. It'll just stay there on its own. So if we change this back to regular, and then change this back to regular as well, and make sure that everything else is where it should be, because now that also affected the change here on the hover state. So we go back here, and we'll double click in. There we go. Now, when somebody hovers over this, it's going to stay bold as it should. And now our little navigation should be ready to go. And it is. Awesome. Okay. So I know I've been talking a lot. We haven't got very far, but I definitely wanted to spend time on demonstrating a very integral feature of Adobe XD, and that's using components and knowing how to use them. So next up, let's say for instance, we're also going to have something over here. Now, many times people will simply opt to take their navigation and put it all the way to the right. And this is completely fine. If you want to do this and you only have a few links, that's what I would recommend doing, because instead of putting them here in the middle, it kind of doesn't fill out the whole layout, right? Because if we go back and we enable our grid, we have all this space. But sometimes you can have a navigation right here with a few links, but then have some other links that are different semantically that are situated right here to the right. So I'm going to do that. Actually, let's leave that on. We're going to have two links here. So I'm going to duplicate this, and we're going to have a contact. So a contact button is different than like a home, features, pricing. A contact is usually like of a lesser important element when we're talking about the areas that a visitor might want to immediately visit. Like they want to see the homepage, they want to see your features, they want to know how much it costs. Contact might be secondary. That's why I'm splitting these up. Let's also put a call to action of some sort. Now, when it comes to UI design, you'll hear the term CTA, or it's an acronym for call to action. It's basically anything you want the visitor to do. If you want them to click something, that's a call to action. If you want them to scroll down, that's a call to action. If you want them to fill out a form, that's a call to action. If you want them to buy something, you get it. We're going to put one that says Go Premium, like this is some sort of premium task service, right? So to do that, we're going to style it differently because it is a call to action. We're not going to make it like a simple just piece of type like this. So I'm going to first, we're going to get the rectangle tool, and we're going to start in the very left right there and drag out somewhere around there. And you can use your keyboard up and down keys as well as the right and left to situate things very easily if you need to make fine adjustments. We can also down here, we're going to leave on a border this time, but take off the fill. And we're going to notice these little corners here. We haven't done this yet. So when you create a shape like a rectangle, you have these little corner circular things that we can grab a hold of. If you left click it, pull in, you can create rounded edges. And when you pull them all the way in, that creates what's called a pill shape container. So we're going to increase the size. Let's go ahead, by the way, and get rid of the grid view. Let's use our primary color for the stroke. And then inside of it, let's go ahead and put in a actual text link here. And this is going to be Go Premium. We also want to make it bold. All right, and let's see, like the size, maybe we could beef this up just a tad bit, pull these back in. And we'll make this blue as well, that blue color, the primary color. And this might be too wide, so we can drag this in over here. Now we can select both and do what we did before. You know, you left click, shift, left click to select both of those elements that we just created. And then we can right click and create a component and then choose padding once again. And they're pretty much even for the most part. This is 27 here. Let's just do 24 and 9 and 9. Okay. So now we can change this type and the width of that container will change. So see, whatever. All right. So let's go back to Go Premium. All right, and that is our navigation. Let me real quickly check the grid just to see if that's, yeah, we want to make sure that this is situated exactly where it needs to be. And there we go. That is the navigation. Very, very, very simple. All right, so next up is what's commonly referred to as the hero section. So on a website, on your homepage, or the landing page as it's called sometimes, you'll have what's called the hero section, which is generally found underneath your nav bar. And this is where really important pieces of type go. This is where you're trying to grab the person's attention and you're trying to answer a question that they might have in their head, which is, what is this site about? All right, so you have to really choose your headline. You might have a sub-headline of text, a call to action, like a real strong call to action, and maybe some accompanying graphic of some sort. That's a very typical pattern for creating a landing page. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take, and by the way, we could turn on our grid here. We're gonna take the type tool, and I wanna show you something very important about the type tool here. If I simply left click once, and I make a headline, a task app that doesn't stink. All right, and we increase the size by left clicking and dragging up here. Let's say, for instance, we wanted to have 2 columns. So we hit enter after right before the D and doesn't. All right, so that works. But a better way, if you have to have text that wraps like that, is to left click and drag before you create that layer, that text layer, and you could drag out to wherever you want it to wrap. So now when we left click and release a task app that doesn't, let's do this. App that, there we go, doesn't stink. And it does it for us automatically, so it's a time saver. All right, so we could choose to put this text right here aligned right here on this same column. We can indent it here, another column, or we can go here even further. It all depends on how your design is structured and what makes sense. And sometimes your immediate thought process of putting it here on this third column, that will change in the future. It all depends, it's okay. That's why we use design programs to first create a design of what we want a website to look like, rather than just hopping right into HTML and CSS and code. Very important lesson. A lot of people ask me that. Why do we have to design it when we're just gonna start over with HTML and CSS? And I was like, this is the reason why, because it's so quick and easy to iterate and to change your design. All right, so right here, we could choose to use this blue, but for me, I'm gonna make it black. It's a high contrast, and people will see it because we have pretty large type here. But most importantly, we're gonna use our primary color for our primary call to action button, and that's gonna really stand out, because that's the thing that we want people to click. So a task app that doesn't stink. Okay, so we have some other options here, like we could change the letter spacing by, changing this value. We can change the line height right here by changing this. And what we're gonna do for this particular element is change the line height. Like right there, I think that's pretty good. You make sure, you make sure that your app or your type is very easy to read. Now, I'm gonna create another type layer. I'm gonna hit Control D to duplicate it. Hold Shift and just move it up to like right around here. And I'm going to double click into it and then hit Control A to select all. And I'm gonna put in a subheadline. It's nitty and gritty. It's a very silly title here. And this is going to be like a sub headline. Now, why does this not look good? Well, it's because they're styled exactly the same. So we have to reinforce what's called what? The visual hierarchy. And so when we do that, we can do it in multiple ways. So we're going to do this primarily through scale, but we're going to change some other things about this. We're going to make it really different, but it's going to look a lot better than this. And in fact, I'm going to duplicate this off to the side and we'll compare them afterwards. So first, scales have to come down a lot. So we're going to take the scale, down to like 26, and we're going to hold shift and put that maybe right around there. Now that's already looking better. I mean, if we compare these two, this is so much better looking, but we can still make it different. We can also change the color. So the color, we have many options. We can make it blue. Now that even looks better than the previous version where this was just black. We can make it gray so that it doesn't have as much contrast, but it still has enough to the point at which it's readable. You don't want to do stuff like this. It's too hard to see. So we want to come up here. If you're going to have text, it's worth people being able to read it, unless it's like a big watermark in the background, as it's called. Now, we could also change this up further. If we select this, we can change, you could select this option here for uppercase. All right, so now they're all uppercase. And we can also extend the letter spacing by dragging this up. Now, I think I even might want to make it a little bit smaller. And there we go. Look how much vastly different this looks compared to this. This is hard to read. You're not really sure, like they're two separate sentences and it just does not look good. So get in the habit of really reinforcing your visual hierarchy by placing emphasis and priority on to your elements, and doing so in a way that makes sense. When I say priority, this right here, a task app that doesn't stink, this is your main headline. It's so much more important than the sub-headline text. It's nitty and gritty, right? I mean, so think about it like that. And the way we reinforce this visual hierarchy is through your other UI design fundamentals, such as typography, scale, font weight, the alignment, the white space between them, all that stuff. All right, enough on the UI design fundamental stuff. Right here, we could choose to have another like maybe a couple not a couple paragraphs, but a couple sentences. You could do that if you wanted to. For me, I'm just gonna have a big call to action like right here. And it's gonna be styled pretty similar to this one, but it's gonna be filled in with all blue with white text so that it really stands out. So we're gonna take our rectangle, drag those in to create the pill container, get rid of the fill, give it this color right here. By the way, I want to show you something. Let's go back here to the libraries, and if we take this, we have this blue rectangle selected. Let's choose this plus right there under colors. That's going to make it so that if we want to right click and edit, or before we edit it, if we choose right click and highlight on canvas, it's going to highlight every element that uses that color. But watch what doing this really, how it's really powerful. If we right click and choose edit, and we choose in the future, or your client asks you, or your employer asks you, what if we change this blue to something else? It's going to be so much easier to do it here, because guess what? They're going to change everywhere. Look at that. So when you're dealing with a large project that has hundreds of layers and tons of artboards, working intelligently really will pay off because it's going to save you time.